Welcome. It's just gone 7 p.m., Wednesday, the 24th of July, and you are watching episode 139 of Regional Wrap. Regional Wrap, providing an insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, Broken Family, Broken Nation, is my guest Luke McCormack, President of the National Civic Council. Since 2008, Luke has worked for the National Civic Council and its sister organisation, Australian Family Association. He has managed campaigns on life issues, marriage, family economics, children's rights, and freedom of speech and belief. Luke is passionate about restoring a better deal for Australian families. He is married to Caroline, and he married in 2004, and they now have 6 children. Luke's studies include business for not-for-profit organisations, science, theology, and teaching. His favourite hobbies are mountain bike riding, running, and brewing beer. Good combination, Luke. Welcome.
Oh, thanks very much, Bill. It's good to be with you, and thanks for the invitation.
Thanks very much for making yourself available. It's quite interesting and fortuitous we're having this conversation today because the media has just come out with stories that Australia's birth rate has dropped down to the lowest figures since the 1980s, and the government's, of course, worried about population. They want the economy to grow when you need a growing population. Although they have been sort of using the Ponzi scheme of mass immigration of late, which has actually hurt families in regards to pushing up the demand for housing, thus the prices, demand for electricity, infrastructure. So all these costs that have come about, and the families are the ones who are suffering, and it doesn't seem to matter what the government does in regards to trying to find a way of adding a few more pennies to the family budget through allowances of that, or childcare, or now free kindy, all these sort of like incentive. It still doesn't really resonate with families and what their needs are. How do you see the situation as we go ahead with this to address the declining birth rate and the precarious position that the traditional family is under?
Well, firstly, Bill, I agree with your observations. That is sort of what it's like. That's the vibe, and it's really bad, obviously, in certain places. If you're anywhere near one of the big capital cities, the younger families are really feeling the pinch. I like the way you touched on a few other issues there, like relating to industry and jobs and the various costs. And it's like the government, aware that it's probably quite a complicated issue generally. Their tactic often is to throw a little bit more cash at something. But it's like what we've got is a deep structural flaw. And I think yourself and your supporters and followers would probably agree with me that it's pretty easy to identify a couple of them. I mean, without touching on, say, just cultural issues, we could identify income tax is unfair because it taxes people with one income in the family and 2 incomes in the family so differently. The childcare subsidy is very biased in only one direction and almost completely fails do-it-yourself care. And things like the paid parental leave scheme, which replaced, it was desired by Labor, introduced, and then the coalition at one point tried to make it even more biased, and is designed very specifically, mainly by the feminists from Emily's List in the Labor Party, to ensure that in between pregnancies, you would go back to work and leave your approximately 4 to 6 month old baby in daycare in order to make sure that you qualify for the paid parental leave scheme, which is about $12,000 to $14,000 worth now, for your next baby. So that's a cleverly designed example, which, in my view, has a generally like a suppressing effect on getting a family to have their desired number of children. Because at the moment, I don't think they are.
It's all aimed to get both parents in the workforce. I mean, we've had this situation probably from the 1980s where we had the introduction for the first time of dinks, double income, no kids, at least for some time. So what happened is these people with two lots of disposable income. They lived mainly in the capital cities. Of course, Sydney was the key place. And what marketers work out very, very quickly, if people have got more money, well, then they come up with things to get hold of that money. And that usually, it usually starts off being attractive as goods and services they get advantage of. But what happens, it also pushes up the market at cost for everything. So because they've got more money, they'll pay over the mark for housing. So housing starts to creep up, and they pay over the mark for whatever other goods and services are there. And so the marketers will quickly work out we can add another so many dollars. But the trouble is that left the people who are on the single income family not being able to keep up, and so their ability to buy into the house market as a percentage of their budget, that started to be, pretty shaky. I mean, I'm an old guy. I bought my first house when I was about 20 as a single person. Dumb move, because I didn't realise if you were single, you didn't get the homes grant.
Yes.
And then if you bought the house, well, when you got married, well, you couldn't get the home grant again. So, I cut my nose off there, but that was just being young and a bit bold, and I thought I was doing getting ahead of the market sort of thing. And it did work out a little bit, but still, I missed out on that little beauty. So we stayed a single income family up until our eldest hits high school, and then my wife went and got a bit of a part-time job in that. But all through that period, our family unit was fairly traditional, it was almost as same as my parents and that. But now it's got to the situation that people feel that if they get married, there's no way that they can just survive on a single wage packet to sort of get the house and get all the things you sort of need. So is that one of the big things that you think's happened? Is this drive up of prices and that, and the need for both people to be in work and no sort of counterbalance in regards to providing for single income families, so they aren't so far behind the ball, by choosing to look after their children?
Well, firstly, I'd say this is the biggest issue. So, like, if we take that point that there's something at the heart of family life in Australia that's under stress, otherwise we would have at least a replacement level birth rate. In fact, interestingly, like going back, say, at least 10 years, there was a survey done in Australia where they asked people, what's your desired number of children? And it came out to be about, on average, one more than the birth rate. So your average Australian family has had one baby less than they desired. Now, the question is, well, what's the stress factor? And I think you've nailed it really. At the moment, it's if you need to get two incomes, the family is almost immediately under stress. Now, there'll be a few exceptions to that where you've got a particularly well-placed job that's got great location and hours for you, and you don't feel particularly stressed. They're pretty rare. For most people, it's quite stressful. It's like seriously hard to juggle. I mean, often people can juggle the first baby, maybe even the second child, I should say, by this stage, getting to a third child and then trying to hold down two incomes in the home at three children starts to get really complicated. And then you deal with how big's the car, how big's the house, do you ever get to actually see each other? You're so busy in and out. But one interesting thing that I only discovered going back 6 or 7 years, because I got to follow quite a few of our campaigns we've run on this topic, was that in the year 1999 to 2000, roughly, one of the reforms at that time was to allow the regulation change for the banks so that banks could now issue a mortgage against not just one income, but two. And that really set things off. So if a bank's allowed to do that, then guess what? You get told you could borrow a lot more money if you got two incomes. And if they're two steady jobs and you've got the ability to hold them down, well, you'd be able to get a decent loan and outbid everyone else at the auction, etc. So I think that would have added, if you like, a lot of fuel to the fire that was already there across a few other issues.
But also the other thing is they keep on this pathway to keep parents away from their children with the current plans that they've got. Childcare to me, well, I always call child prison, daycare. It's just a prison. You take, because we are never part of that group sort of thing. You would see, I'd be going to work, around about 6 o'clock in the morning, and you see parents, at that time of morning, getting their babies out of the car seat and running into the childcare centre and going, "That's yours. Bye bye. I'll be back sometime tonight." I don't think that's a real great way to have to live your life. I mean, if you choose that, that's fine. But it's getting to the stage where you have to, because they've created all these implements like childcare allowances that sort of promote that. And in some instances, talking to some people, it's quite expensive. It's $100 and something for each day or that. So, gee, you have to be earning a lot of money to sort of get ahead. And then you're missing out on all this interaction and family building and bonds of family relationship for the sake of, $80 a day, maybe, by the time you pay all these other expenses. Because going to work isn't cheap. You've got to clothes, transport, other bits and pieces. So what do you think the answer is to give people that's needed, so people can have an option of at least one parent staying home and not being completely disadvantaged?
Yeah, great question. And so we've put a fair bit of thought into it over the years, both the National Civic Council, and we publish our ideas in a magazine called News Weekly. It's also digital as well. That's been going since 1941. It's sort of thoroughly independent and quite old, and it's got quite the legacy. And along with that relationship we've got with the Australian Family Association, and what we boil down what we think the reforms are to about three things, but I like to probably practically break it up a bit into what's ideal and would help a lot of people right now, but possibly be a bit expensive and politically impossible for the short term, and what's practical politically that's for the long term. So firstly, the ideal. If we could, if you and I were in charge, Bill, this is what I'd suggest we do. we'd have split incomes. So you can split your income across to your dependents, or at least to one or two of them, or at least to a certain cap. So maybe $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. You could distribute your income, your wages, across to other family members who are dependent on you, which follows the principle of tax in general, and follows the rule for family trusts, which is you consider tax after it's distributed to its recipients. Whereas with pay-as-you-go tax, There's no consideration of where the income actually goes, who enjoys it. It's assumed you enjoy it all yourself. You're taxed as if you enjoy it all yourself, and then the government goes, oh, hang on a second, this person has 4 dependents at home, utterly reliant on that income. And then there's schemes to try to give it back to you in the form of family tax benefit. I mean, it's good family tax benefits there. The only catch is when John Howard introduced it, because beforehand there was a little bit of recognition in the tax system for children, and John Howard's government made it a bit more generous, but by putting it into the payment system through the Families Department, through Centrelink, it eventually got the label of being welfare. And people think of it like it's welfare when it was never meant to be welfare. I mean, welfare's for when things are going wrong. You're sick, you're unemployed, you're disabled, you need help, something's gone wrong. Having children is not something going wrong. It's fantastic. And secondly, I mean, you're being have money removed from your wage that they probably shouldn't have touched if they'd considered how many people are dependent on it. And there's at least 10 OECD countries that have some form of income splitting or family tax arrangements. America's got one, France has got a fairly generous one. So it's not uncommon. I think Canada experimented with one recently with one of their conservative governments, probably a couple of governments ago. We could do something. Certainly there's some Queensland senators like Matt Canavan who've proposed it and spoken to it both in their party and in the parliament. That would be good. Initially, it would seem like it's going to cost the government a bit of money, and yeah, sure. Initially, when you try to work it out, it probably would. But the effect it would have on de-stressing the family unit would be quite significant if you could hold it in place. So that's one, income tax. Yeah.
But it also might lower the bill for childcare allowance and that, because people are now in a better position to make that decision that they could look after their own children. So there could be, yes, it might cost money for the to go towards the family, but it could also take money out of the need for the childcare system, and also it could release some of those workers who are tied up in. It's a matter of opinion, but I don't see it as an overly productive industry. It doesn't produce anything. Yes, it looks after children, but it doesn't produce widgets. It doesn't create wealth. The only wealth it creates is for the big business owners and organisations that run childcare that become multi-millionaires, like we saw when it was first introduced. So, like you're saying, it's going to cost money, but there could be, if it works well in regards to have at least one of the parents deciding to look after their own children, it could have a saving on that side of it. And not only that, if it would also have a community benefit that now there is a number of people at home with their children in your suburb or in your immediate area that can socialise, and those children can socialise as well or even better with more adult and family care than they do in the child care under the current regime.
Yeah, no, really good point. So in other words, the phrase I like to use is it would take the heat out of a false market, so that the daycare childminding market is 80% a false government created market that, like you said, doesn't produce things that couldn't have otherwise been produced without government involvement, i.e. minding and caring and raising children was going to take place anyway. The government steps in at high expense, very expensively, to do what we would normally do ourselves. And then, as you said, in the not particularly the for-profit sector, quite a few people have gotten quite rich out of it. Not to mention a few scammers and fraudsters. I'm not sure if you followed that news, but
I was
pretty significant fraudsters in there too.
Well, I was in Melbourne in the probably early 2000s, and there was ethnic communities that were brilliant at using the childcare system, like John, I'll just call them John and Joe or something. John would supposedly look after Joe's kids, and Joe's kids would look after someone, but they never actually changed houses. But they were getting something like $2,000 a fortnight for supposedly minding their someone else's children, well, someone else might mind their children, but they never actually changed homes. And I mean, the government is so slow or sort of fixing those rorts, and it was just amazing how much money people were making.
Yeah, and look, I remember one trip to a committee, a parliamentary committee, to look into a bill, and like, to be honest, I can't remember whether it was just on childcare or other related issues, but you'd be surprised, or maybe not, that a couple of the Labor senators on this committee were convinced somehow that the income tax the government received from, for example, the second parent, usually the mother, in a paid job, was going to cover the expenses of the childcare subsidies, when it's very obvious in the data, and even to a common person doing an analysis, that that is not true. The income tax from the second wage gets nowhere near covering the childcare subsidy. So this is a very expensive way to mind children, basically. I actually authored this little article once, just to really ram it home. I did a little, case study of two families. They were both on the same gross income. One was from one income. The other family had it from two incomes. They both had the same three children of the same age. Sorry, three kids the same age. One family was using 3 days of daycare. The other family using none. Guess which family was a net provider of money to the government, and which family was a net taker of money?
I suppose the ones looking after their own kid paid the tax, and the other ones took the money, no?
Yeah, and by a considerable margin too. So in this study, which it's a bit old now and dealt with different figures from a different year, but like one family was that single income family that did their own care of their own kids. They contributed to the government something like $5,000 to $8,000 to $10,000 a year or more. That's after family tax benefits, so after the bit they get back, and includes things like GST and the whole thing. People forget about fuel tax and GST when they're thinking about how much tax do I pay. Well, a lot of people just think about pay as you go. That's just the beginning, right? Anyway, the other family received from the government net $30,000 in the year that their third child was born. So there was paid parental leave scheme paid to them, all the childcare subsidies, etc., etc. So we're not talking about an insignificant difference between two families that could be living next door. I mean, we know we've heard the term the mummy wars. It's sort of like a real thing. It might have died down a little bit now, where you literally have two very similar sort of families, but one has a baby and the government offers them $500, and the other, the next door neighbour, has a baby and the government gives them $15,000. The only difference being that one mum stayed loyal to their employer in between a pregnancy, and the other one stayed loyal to, say, minding their 2-year-old and maybe their 5-year-old. That's what the government.
Yeah. Well, there's also another problem where this conversation comes in, from my view, in the regions and that. I mean, there's plenty of people in the big cities can take advantage of all the schemes that are going around because there's facilities in there. But when you think about it, people in a lot of the rural areas, there is no childcare, or it's a long way away, and it's in town somewhere. And even in regional centres, it's probably a bit sketchy as well. And then if you get further out, as you go a bit towards the outback, well, you're never going to get any benefit from childcare. You always got to have to look after your own kids. So you get zip benefit. That's no chance whatsoever to take advantage of the offerings that are available to the people in the city. But then as the children get older, you've got to send them further afield to get an education or whatever. Yes, there's some allowance for boarding schools and stuff like that, but it's not that great. So the people out in the bush, out in the regional areas and the rural areas, are never going to get the same monetary benefit for looking after their children and providing them with education up to the time that they can cut the umbilical cord and move off for themselves. Do you think there should be some sort of calculation that takes over the whole sort of 18 years of a child's dependency? So if someone's missing out in the early years and when they have to send them to boarding school, at least they can get something back to sort of offset that sort of cost.
Wow, that's really interesting. To be honest, I'd never heard that proposed, never thought about it myself, and I find myself liking it straight away. And there's no particular reason why the government couldn't run those calculations. That would be quite feasible. Um, so yeah, I mean, I know the government's already got the skill, the systems to handle where you live, how distant you are to services. So how remote you are, how difficult it is to travel to get near to a school. They've got that data, so it wouldn't be that hard, therefore, like you mentioned, to run an analysis of how much support you've actually had to raise this child over that time, what your taxable income has been over that time, how much tax you paid over that time, and then work out if there's a way to help you, like you said, when it gets to that's a certain age or a certain part of that child's life. That's a good one. I like it a lot. I mean, I actually like
Because
Sorry, go on, Bill.
Because what I was thinking is when people in the rural and more remote areas sort of do have to send their children into Brisbane or some major centre, usually find the costs and that are fairly prohibitive. And what happens is the child only comes back during the school holidays, and the parents would be pretty strapped to go down and visit them during the school and sort of, maybe go to a parent teachers and just a sports carnival that's going on or whatever. So if there was that shared benefit over that time, when it came to that period where the child's got to be away for those years of high school, that they are able to see and visit the child during the term, rather than just only when they're basically thrown out at the school closes down. So, I mean, it's fairly complicated, but the thing is, the thing that gets me, we in the regions aren't able to benefit as much from any scheme that the government comes up with, as well as the people in the city. I mean, like if you're looking at Brisbane, starting on the 1st of August, there's got to be 50-cent public transport fares. How the hell are people in regional Queensland going to benefit from that? We don't have any public transport. If we do, it's pretty ordinary. So, and even if you go a bit out of the major regional cities like Townsville, Cairns and that, there is no public transport. So, there's just no benefit for us.
Yeah, well, I think you're touching on a pretty big issue for Australia. When I discovered your group, your regional exit group that you run, Bill, well, firstly, the National Civic Council, where I've done 15 years of work and now lead for a new generation. The 5 principles we're based on, one of them is decentralisation, right? Something people don't appreciate, that if you get decentralisation correct and well supported in both power, politics, population, industry, everyone benefits, right? And so as the principle behind actually developing more states in the country is a good one, which I generally would support. I think we're going to need a lot more Australians to help make it happen, but maybe not. But that's definitely worth having the conversation constantly to win that fight. But it goes right down to whether or not the young couple that just got married and want to have a baby can afford a house. It's far more likely you could afford that house if you're in a smaller town or if you're in a small city compared to a big city. And so, like you said, there's policy driven towards capital cities, and 50 cents for a Brisbane train fare ain't going to help you up in rural, remote, central, and North Queensland, is it? So, yeah, that it's a big issue. As you know, Australia's got 80% of its population in capital cities. People forget America. One of the things they've somehow done really well is they've managed to get 80% of the population not in the big capital cities. They're in small cities. And they've done analysis, some demographers, I think they'll probably be called a demographer perhaps, or social studies, where they argued that a city that gets to about 1 million people is almost ideal because you've got enough people and money to have a decent hospital, a university, possibly two decent sporting recreational facilities, and yet your commute time and your ability to move around is still family friendly. So when, your 8-year-old daughter says, "Can I do dance?" You're like, well, yeah, I suppose it's only 10 minutes around the corner on a Wednesday night. Yeah, we could do that. But in Brisbane, it'd be like, no way, I've got to drive 40 minutes and then stay for an hour and a half and then drive 40 minutes back. Sorry, how about we do dance next year? So I think it's fair to say some small country towns, children can have a better life, and so can the parents. But it's all based on that principle of bigger is not necessarily better.
No. And the thing is, the policies at the moment seem to be aimed at shrinking regional Queensland. We've got things out there in regards to making life harder for farmers to do their job. Government's keen to lock up more land. Basically, don't want to build infrastructure. Don't want to build a dam. Don't want to build water projects. All those things that make the regions great and make them productive and wealth creating, they're just not that into it. So it is becoming an issue and a concern for people in regional Queensland. But getting back to the family situation, with this latest news of our population, our fertility rate dropping, it's not new. We had similar problems in the 80s. Most other Western countries had similar problems. You look at Italy, they probably only got a fertility rate of about 1.4. Most Western countries are under 2, so they're actually a declining population of their if it wasn't for immigration. And I suppose the most classic and most stark one, as an example, is Japan. It
Yes.
now has a population of about 125, 126 million, but with a low fertility rate, I think it's down around about 1, and it's been below 2 for almost 2 generations now. They're looking at down the gun barrel that by about 2050 they'll be down to about 106 million people, and then the turn of the century they'll be down to about around about the 90 million people. That's fairly catastrophic economically for a country, but they're not going to. I don't think Japan will shift on immigration. But do you think that's an ideal way to go? Like in a Western country, the population go down, you just fill it up with foreign migrants and that. Do you think that's a palatable situation?
Well, I guess to some extent that's what we do, although it's probably not the only reason. However, in terms of dealing with population dearth problems, that's just it's a non-solution. It's sort of like a band-aid solution. You're not really addressing the actual issue. very interesting. So you mentioned Japan, and so I got to see a documentary by a data analyst by the name of Stephen Shaw. And on YouTube, everyone who's listening can watch part one for free on YouTube, I believe. And it's called Birth Gap. It could be one word. I'm not sure if it's one word or two words. And he analyzes Japan and a lot of countries. He gets a lot of data right through Europe and the Americas and most Western countries. And yeah, you're right. So Japan's had trouble for a long time and they don't know what to do. And whatever policies they've got at the moment aren't working. He interviews a lot of people, like fairly in-depth interviews, and tries to get like the story out of them and tries to find out how they're feeling about having more children or getting married at all and having a child. And he sort of goes there and he encounters a fair bit of pain in the people he's interviewing. Quite a bit of the pain he encounters is usually women who've effectively left it too late, like they've pursued their career and had enjoyed it, had fun, but didn't quite realise that if the body clock's moving along and you've got to find a suitable partner, which itself can be quite difficult, to have baby number one to get started, and it can all just suddenly vaporize and they realize they're 35 and getting to 40 and it's not going to happen. Interestingly, though, I'm not sure if you have to go to part two, which you can pay for somewhere, part three perhaps. He mentions that when they ran the data and compared 1970 to 2020, roughly, the actual size of the families we're having around the world, on average, so there'll be exceptions, is actually the same. So wait for it. But those who have a family, who have some kids, the size of the family is pretty much the same. But the childless person, so the childless men and women, has gone from like the 1 in 20 approximate average to 1 in 4. And in Japan, 1 in 3. So that tells us something pretty important, and that is that trying to get rid of any obstacles or encouraging people to help them find a partner early enough to couple and have baby number one should be the top priority of government policy. Of course, the problem is I'm not even sure, Bill, if the government considers boosting our birth rate as an actual priority or not. But if they did, they'd have to find a way to get 20-year-olds to have courage and help them overcome obstacles. And one of them might be affording a house and getting rid of your HECS debt. So I'm not sure if you've, yeah.
Or actually even being able to interface with other humans rather than their phones would be a good start.
Yes, I mean, at my age, which is approaching 50, I saw the people getting the benefit of online dating, which helped people who were struggling quite a bit. But I see, like probably you do, there's a new problem now, and that is so much screen time and not enough actual social proper time that you start to wonder if that's going to affect the coupling. Yeah, coupling rates.
I just also wonder if the youth, and starting off with children, whether they're developing the social skills and the interaction skills necessary to develop good relationships. I mean, we seem to have this culture. Yes, people get out and they can mix and at night somewhere in a hotel or a nightclub and that, but it's usually the focus is drinking or having a good time, and just not, the idea is not to think about relationships long term or developing a good relationship. It's just that night sort of thing. And it's quite different to when I was young. When we went out, yeah, we would always try to hook up. But the thing is, if you found someone, you always sort of at least looked at the opportunity, whether it was going to be a reasonable relationship. It wasn't just going to be a day or a night or whatever. It was, well, can this work out for months and months and lead to something better? But that doesn't seem to even enter the equation now.
I've got quite a few friends who are involved in some aspect of youth work or youth ministry through churches and outreaches and charities. And what they report back is it's pretty interesting. It seems to be a trend where young people are actually less sexually active. So there's probably less random hookups occurring. At the same time, loneliness is on the rise, and that problem with sort of meaninglessness, a little bit of depression, like what's life about, is a little bit on the rise. Yeah, if anything, they're a bit more cautious actually about like jumping into bed than perhaps their parents back in the
Yeah,
70s
because
and 80s or
responsibility
whatever.
goes a long way these days. That can follow you.
Yeah.
I suppose the other thing is too, well, I understand, that people a bit apprehensive about moving forward into a relationship, and because of all they can see the stress on their parents and that financially, the cost of housing, so they don't have the same thing. Well, it was just automatic. If you go back more generation, most people thought they would go. By the time they're in their early 20s, they would hook up with someone, be looking at getting married, and then having a couple of children. It was sort of that was a natural accepted process for the vast majority. Like if there was 20 kids in the classroom, most of them would expect that they would be hooked up and married by the time they were in their 20s and have kids by their 30s. These days, I doubt the young people even, they're basically looking at all the problems of the world, because, the world's going to end anyway because of climate change tomorrow. There's bad things about disinformation and that misinformation. It's more of a in your face world today. Like when we were younger, we're just getting on with whatever was going on around in our immediate area or whatever. But now there's so much information being poured onto them that I can see they would be getting a bit depressed or sort of a bit melancholy. Well, how am I going to navigate this very difficult future, especially if money I'm never going to have enough money to get a house.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're looking for like where something's going well, and the little bit of light on the horizon, I think, is you got to look over to Hungary in Europe. Now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with what they've done there, because I guess we have to get into the mindset of the teenager and the 20-year-old and think, well, what for them? What's the obstacles? And they seem to have got something right in Hungary in the last 10 years, where the sort of pro-family, fairly conservative government have introduced a suite of policies that don't focus on people like me who've already got kids, but focus on the young forming family. And so I think there's a bit of genius in it. So one of their policies, for example, is that a mother will never pay any more income tax for their entire life after giving birth to their fourth child. Another one is interest-free loans.
I think they have to achieve that by the time they're 37 or something. I think
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, yep. And then there's reductions of their university debt. So if they have a child under the age of 30, there's a little bit of a reduction. They have the second child, there's more of a reduction. And then the university debt can be completely forgiven. The whole aim being, don't put off having your family. Don't let a university debt put it off as if the university debt was more important. Have your family, have confidence. We've got you covered. We think what you're doing is important. and it seems to have worked. They've actually bumped up their birth rate, bumped up their marriage rate. They've even got consideration of when you need to move to a bigger car, there's some sort of a concession or a grant. So it'd be worth examining that to sort of, how do you practically get into the life of a young person who feels daunted and make it a bit
Well, we've got to
easier?
make them more optimistic. I mean, that's the trouble. I mean, I get the feeling
Yeah.
that so many kids are pessimistic. I mean, when I was young, I was always looking forward to the
Mm.
future because I thought there was always going to be an opportunity, and never know me luck, I might become a millionaire. Well, that never happened, but yeah, but you were reasonably optimistic in regards to, well, you
Yep.
saw your parents get a house and
Mm.
sort of be reasonably happy. I mean, not all times were fantastic at home, but the thing is, you didn't feel daunted that I'm not going to achieve that. But there's scenes now. I mean, especially the way the housing market is, people would just be going, it's
Yes.
never going to happen, never going to afford it. And maybe that's true because I mean they might be a bit narrow in the thinking. I want to live in Bondi or something like that, where the houses are. So maybe they have to change the thing, but we've got to make it so there's an opportunity for them and they feel optimistic about their
Mm.
future. That they're just not going to be continually have this burden on their back.
Yep. Yep. I mean, like a simple one. I mean, there are a few of these where there's an incentive to go and begin your career in a rural town. You can make the incentive through, say, the income tax system, or you could make the incentive that you get a better wage, government boosted wage by being out there working in that rural town. But that provides often a stepping stone, because I think a lot of people forget usually life works out with steps. Everything doesn't come in one big hit. A bit like how people see a family with a few kids and think, how do you do it? Well, it doesn't happen overnight. Like, it's very gradual, so you sort of get used to it. Same with trying to own your first home. I know my wife and I, our first home was in a rough suburb right beside drug dealers. Didn't know it at the time. But that got a bit interesting and a bit rough, but still, it was a step. And it was a step that allowed us to make the next step. And so, yeah, I think you're right about perhaps if there's a culture of I want everything now, and I've seen how to be entertained and happy and successful and have my luxuries, and I want them straight up. Well, that's not going to work. It has to be sacrificed,
No.
has to be practical, has to be steps involved, and a little bit of risk. But this is where the government could easily be incentivizing people to be in rural settings without
Well,
too much work, in my
well,
opinion.
that's one thing, but also I think it'd be so easy for them. Well,
Mm.
as far as I'm concerned, as soon as the couple get married, they should have the option at that point in time to split their own incomes right there and then, so that
Mm.
they now have a partnership. Uh,
Mm.
I I think people treat marriage as, oh, you can get married. It's a few words, and then if you're sick of it or whatever, you can just tear that up and move on to something
Mm.
else or whatever. We need to sort of get people to understand that it is a contract, and probably we might. Probably the only way to shake them up is to say, well, when you go and get married, when you sign it, you got to sign it in front of lawyers and understand you are in a contract rather than just going to a ceremony, and
Mm.
sort of thinking it as just a church thing. But
Mm.
it's a legally supposed to be a legally binding contract that you're entering into. But right at that point, you know, maybe they should be given this fact that you now are a partnership. You can split your incomes. Let's give you an ABN. Let you split your supers. And then if one decides to look after the children, well, their income is split between both of them. It's going
Mm.
into the pot and the super. I mean, and that maybe they'll work harder and see themselves together for a much longer time going forward. And then when they have kids, they see this benefit again. a third person's coming into the equation and there's a further splitting or something like that, and you're making a real solid unit based on the fact you are now a bonded financial concern in a joint venture or whatever you want to call it. I don't care.
Yep.
But it gives you that feeling that, well, we're invincible together. Apart, so maybe it will work better. But I think there's too much of the situation where people take marriages fairly lightly, and sort of, and the fact that it doesn't seem financially equality at times because someone gives up work to look after children. We need to give that whole unit that cohesion of, no, we're all in this together and we're all benefiting from it.
Yeah, I like the way you're going with that. It's like it's meant to be complementary. Yeah, so it's like the husband and a wife, they're co-laborers. It's like running a small business. You are together trying to work out the best way to efficiently and fairly manage a set of laborious tasks and responsibilities for the good of the whole. I mean, the word common good is not used much like it used to get used, but it's an important concept that everyone makes little sacrifices for the group, and you get good cohesion, and you can achieve things, like you said, that you couldn't achieve just by yourself. It's like what's the word we give for that? 1 + 1 = 3. Yeah, so I mean that's a healthy view of marriage, I think. And for people who've grown up in a very difficult family where their parents were at each other's throats, or there was no sense of they're a team, that would be tough. My wife's a child
I
of
think
divorce.
a lot of that comes about from finances more than anything else.
Yeah, that's right. I think, look, usually people who've come from a rough background are determined that that won't happen to them, if they've got support around them and that. But yeah, so yes, complementarity. It'd be good. I mean, at one stage there was I think maybe they've still got it, Bill. There was a government subsidy that could still be active, and it was largely, I think, thanks to the former MP Kevin Andrews from Victoria, where there was a subsidy you could get for getting marriage counselling.
Yeah.
It wasn't much, but it was it would have helped. It could still be active, perhaps, if anyone wanted to look it up.
I think the other thing is too is as you have more children, there's other expenses in that. The government could easily make those things less of a burden, but they don't necessarily have to give you more money. I mean, we're supposed to have free school, public schooling, but we keep hearing, and I mean, well, I experienced it too. You seem to be forever putting your money in the pocket, but I don't see why, rather than all the time thinking about giving someone more money on the basis of their wage or income or whatever, when it comes to kids, if they're school excursions, it should just all, it should be all equal, so that the government pays for kids to go to excursions. It shouldn't be based on benefits going back to poor people through some other scheme. People shouldn't have any burden from sending their kids to school. So every kid, it doesn't matter what household they come from, they all, it's automatic. They can go to the museum or whatever they're doing, or some other excursion. Things for sports. I don't see the problem with a subsidy for that, but not paid to the parents. What happens is it goes to the organisations and that, so they can keep their fees down. So everyone benefits in the community. They don't, don't have to find absorbent amounts of money. There's heaps of small things the government could do to make sure, as people move through with their family and it grows, and it goes through primary education, secondary education type thing, the burdens don't get so arduous.
Yeah, no, really good observations. I've, we've used quite a few different schools, and they all operate so differently. And but I know what you mean about even the so-called free state schools, not necessarily free, is it? The way it's
Right.
set up. Um, yeah, there's an issue there. Like, we probably don't have time, but the power of parental choice. And it's unfortunate that we have some political parties that don't have much respect for the power of choice. But it is a good way to create healthy competition, diversity, and excellence if you empower parental choice. And it would appear mainly, unfortunately, in recent times from Labor and at times the coalition, where they don't support choice. They want
Right.
to impose as if parents have no idea.
The other thing is too, I
Unfortunate.
remember because I used to go from the suburbs of Perth up to the Air Force Base up at Bullsbrook, and you'd always come across someone towing a float with horses on it or a horse, and always had the sign on it, owning a horse is poverty. Well, having children shouldn't be poverty, or shouldn't,
No.
lower your standard or expectation sort of thing. And I think
Yep.
that's one of the things that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing that really needs to be addressed is this whittling of parental rights. I mean, in your burst, you look after children's rights and that. But I think one of the biggest things that's happened is the undermining of parents' rights.
Mm.
In the last 20 years, I was probably, my
Yep.
wife and I were probably the first about the age that first experienced in the 80s with, primary school children for the first time coming home and letting their mother know, you can't tell me what to do. My teacher said I
Mm.
don't have to do as you tell me. Yay? Well, guess what? That didn't last too long in our household, and I suppose it stayed a reasonable sort of thing in most households into the 2000s and that. But do you think we need to go back and have a look at this situation where parental rights have been sort of eroded? And now we're even talking about where schools can sort of influence the children without saying anything to the parents and have legal
Yeah.
protection.
Yep.
Because if it
It's
doesn't,
a huge issue, and it's growing. And as most your watchers would be aware of, it can get really dangerous pretty quickly now. Partly through the approach taken by gender clinics and by some doctors and by some counsellors,
and some
which
teachers,
and some teachers perhaps, where it's the only approach they have to gender dysphoria is a affirmation approach, starting socially with names and dress and appearance. But this will probably come in crashing down pretty soon, as you've probably seen the legal cases around the world are mounting up. I mean, the UK government shut down the biggest gender clinic there in the UK under investigation. We've had at least one situation in a family court in Australia in the last year where during the 2 week court case, the gender clinic, to defend itself, produced no evidence to the judge. Nothing. So they lost, and the parental rights side won. But you might have seen recently, even The Economist put out an interesting analysis of how gender studies have been manipulated and corrupted. So it could come crashing down pretty hard, but not before literally hundreds of kids have been hurt because they were just going through, say, teenage gender dysphoria for a range of reasons, and quite often connected to some autism. And then the adults around them that are meant to have, respect for them and for their parents have fallen for a affirmation model, which has serious long-term consequences for their health. So I find it so sad. I mean,
But I just find it a complete impingement. Like parents are supposed to be the primary caregivers for the child until they're on their own 2 feet and reach the age of majority and supposed to be responsible with. But for a government to even consider that it should allow, different organisations or different circumstances to cut the parent out of that parental right. I just think it's incorrect for the government to do that in the front, and we need to pull those politicians back in regards to no, you got to stand up. You've got to stand up for the parents, and the parents. You want the parents to look after their children. You don't want the children to run amok and you point the finger at parents if they're not doing the right thing. Well, don't undermine the parents' rights in the first place. But I just don't get where the politicians suddenly became manipulated to say, well, someone's saying, well, we should be able to do this, but they should be standing up for those basic principles.
Yep. Yep. It smacks of a certain type of arrogance, doesn't it? Where you assume you've got to say more and have more wisdom for all those other children out there than their parents do. It's very arrogant. And you think about perhaps the child abuse history that we've dealt with in Australia over the last few decades in, helping people recover and trying to repair wrongs and dealing with that. And I just find it odd that in that same season, we're abandoning children again, if you like, with a lack of responsibility and oversight by parents and adults again, in a different way. Anyway, I really enjoyed this conversation, Bill. I was wondering if it was all right with you if you told me a little bit more about what your organisation does and how you got started.
Oh, well,
What's next for you?
well, this is one sort of arm of it in regards to it gives us an opportunity to talk to different people and get a bit of an idea where their sort of ground is on this sort of issue.
Yeah.
But no, what it started it for me, because originally I'm from West Australia. Obviously, that's the state that almost seceded from the Commonwealth in 1933. They voted to leave Australia, but it was knocked back by the courts in England or the Parliament in England because they thought the referendum wasn't valid. So I come from that state in particular, so we've got some sort of feeling of, sort of we've been left out over the years and that. But most of the time I joined the Air Force. I've been all around Australia, and I've lived most of my time in Victoria. But in 2014, I came up to Queensland, into Cairns. And all I ever heard on the radio, talk back and in the general conversation, people whinging about decisions made in Brisbane. Anyway, that goes on, and people don't seem to change about anything. But then in 2017, we had the redistribution, and I've never really taken much notice of a redistribution of seats before. But what happened is that redistribution in 2017 put 4 more seats in southeast Queensland. So the political influence of regional Queensland, diminished. And so a few of us got together and we sat down and worked out, well, how can we address this diminishing representation in Parliament? And we also sat down and sort of worked out, well, if the population keeps going this way and the population in southeast corner keeps growing at the trend it is, by 2050, we'll probably go down from 20 seats in regional Queensland down to about 12 or 13. So it's a sort of an insidious situation where people it's like the frog in the pot. People don't seem to notice. But the interest I've got is in regards to, it's simply about political representation. We don't want to get into a situation where by the time we hit 8.5 million population of Queensland, which New South Wales already is at, Well, they've only got 8 state seats west of the Great Divide. I mean, there's seats that are on the divide itself, but their number of seats in that sort of west of the divides is gone down. I think it was 22 in the 1950s, and you didn't, of course, you didn't have that many seats in the whole state as you do now. They got 93 as well. So you can see the model that's happening. It's got to happen if we don't do something. So by 2050, we'll be in the same situation where central and North Queensland will probably only have about 10 members of parliament, and you'll probably have a parliament of about 110 people. So our percentage of influence in the parliament is going to completely dissipate. And we're pretty hard pressed to get anything now. I mean, you spend $1 billion down, you got to spend $12 billion down there on a cross river rail tunnel. We've got a bridge up here that's about to fall down. It's reached its life-of-type. It's been reduced to one lane an alternative for our main connection from the tableland to Cairns. You got no water approach. You can't get a dam built. You can't get any infrastructure. There's no emphasis on it. And then we also got a government that wants to basically depopulate the rural areas. They're buying up land along with their NGOs in the conservation movement, locking up tens of thousands, millions of hectares over time of land that you can no longer use. The next step they're going to do is put they're looking to put national heritage listing on a third of the Cape. So there's going to be no development up in the Cape yet. So it denies all that potential. So that's the thrust of why we're doing it. It's not necessarily about the money. It's simply about political representation, making the decisions yourself. And so that's the core of it. We can have new states. Our founding fathers gave us a whole chapter. They gave chapter 6 of the Constitution, because they always expected, because originally all the South Australia, Tasmania, Northern Territory, and Queensland, and Victoria were all parts of New South Wales, and they hived off over time, and they just naturally expected it would continue. So that was put in the Constitution. But I don't know whether they were having a go at us or not, because in the colonial days, if you wanted to break away from Sydney, you just went and asked the colonial office over in Britain to say, well, we can stand on our own 2 feet. It had nothing to do with the Parliament in Sydney. Now, when they wrote the Constitution, they put all the power in the Parliament in Brisbane for Queensland. So you've got to convince them. So that's the hurdle. You've got to get some sort of bounce of power, or make it incentive-wise for them to support it in the first instance. But like I say,
have you interviewed Robbie Katter yet?
I've spoken to Robbie Katter a number of times, and I mean there's counterban as well, and that. It's like a lot of things. People give it lip service, but Robbie Katter and Bob Katter and Shane Knuth and and even George Christensen when he was in Parliament, they came along to the town hall meetings for, we used to hold new state rallies and things like that. They'd come along and have a talk, but they never lead from the front. They've never organised a rally themselves. It's all they'll come to it. It's like they come to cut a ribbon or something like that and be seen with that group, but they don't lead it themselves. So that's the problem I find with a lot of these people who talk about it. They don't actually do anything. So it's always got to be up to the little people to sort of push it. And the other thing is, if you look at New South Wales, the success of the New England New State movement was based on the fact that the communities were more bonded. They're all in the same boat, sort of thing. And you had the situation in the 1940s and up to 50s. You had all independent newspapers. So there was a guy called Victor Thompson, and he organised 130 independent newspapers in rural New South Wales, especially the northeast, to support it. And so they were always going on about it. And so that was the beginning. But today, our biggest problem is, like, leaders of business and industry and stuff like that, they're waiting for the next government contract. They're waiting for the next government grant. So they don't sort of, they don't voice any opinion. So it's hard to get them involved because they don't want to miss out on their opportunity. So it is a very difficult thing, but we just plod on. But it's all about representation. But the other thing is, one of the big hurdles in the past has been, people talk about a North Queensland state. Well, I've never talked about a North Queensland state. I've always talked about a northern viable state. So the people before were talking about somewhere down south of Townsville or whatever be northern Queensland, North Queensland state. But I've always done it on the economics modelling and that, and you need about 1 million people to have a good viable economy. You need obviously a lot of arable land, so you've got agriculture.
Yep.
You need some resources. You've got to have an income, and what a lot of people don't realise, and what we've done is we've basically, instead of fretting over where we're going to put the border, the Commonwealth has already done it for us under the North Australian Infrastructure Fund. They've drawn the line for where Northern Queensland is. And that's ideal for us. It gives us 1 million people. And Northern Queensland, that's 49 local government areas, including the Indigenous ones. Well, we're actually responsible for more than 70% of the state gross product. You think about Central Queensland and Northern Queensland in agriculture, cattle, and mining. Well, guess what? The exports from those things from northern, what I call northern Queensland, which includes Central, equals 85% of all exports for Queensland. We're huge. We're not going to be financially strapped. We don't need any money from Brisbane. We've got all the money. Actually, a lot of, like, you think about it, all the mining executives that's sitting down in Brisbane, their wages and salaries and benefit come from earnings out of Central and North Queensland. Right? All those people who sit in the peak bodies like the banana growers, cane growers, Ag Force, Mineral Council, that sit in Brisbane along Ann Street and George Street, drawing their $250,000 a year, and the CEOs are on more. Well, their money are coming from the farmers and miners and businesses in Central and North Queensland in for most instances. So
Bill, I've got a feeling that yourself or people in your committee, there's probably a few articles in there that would be interested to have a look at and publish in our magazine News Weekly if you're interested.
Yeah, well, we're certainly interested in sort of getting the message out there. That's for sure. And I think we do have a whole swag of information in regards on not just the political side of it and that aspect, but also the financial side and the growth potential. You see, a lot of things, like, people keep going on about the Murray-Darling Basin. It's the food bowl of Australia. Well, guess what? The Murray-Darling Basin only gets 6% of mainland Australia's rainfall. North Queensland gets 35%, and yet you won't build a dam. You won't give us irrigation we're not getting the potential.
What was the name of that proposal?
The Bradfield skill, and you're thinking,
get more water in there, and I remember reading that in News Weekly.
The big problem with Bradfield's system, it was basically designed, or the idea was to take water out of the north and give it to the south. We don't need to do that. We can grow the stuff here. We don't need to send you the water, but we will. You can have some of it if you want. But the thing is, makes much more sense if we use the water here. but you won't even, we can't even get a dam built so we can have our own irrigation system. It doesn't make sense. And the Bradfield system never went north of Townsville. It actually is sort of, I think, it talks about Hell's Gate, which is near Charters Towers. But the Mitchell and Flinders River, which is in the far north Queensland, has much more water. No, we have much more water up on the Cape and that area. What we need to do is slow the progress of that water out to sea, and we can do heaps of things. So, and that's the difference. If you spend $1 billion in, or just take an example, you spend $12 billion in Brisbane building a tunnel for a train to go to save you 8 minutes thing. That is a net loss forever, because it will never make you $1. The user contributions will never pay the capital off or the running costs of it. So it's a net liability forever. If you give us $12 billion and we go and build a number of dams and irrigation systems, we start growing stuff, cotton, sorghum, whatever, raised cattle, you've got a net wealth creation system. You can spend $20 billion in Brisbane and you'll never get a return on it. You spend $20 million in regional Queensland building infrastructure for wealth creation, the nation grows. It doesn't happen in Southeast. You can build another couple of, put a bloody fast rail or a light rail down Gold Coast and that. It doesn't generate any money. It's an ongoing cost. So that's the difference where you spend, when you spend money in the regions on infrastructure, you're likely to get wealth creation out of it. When you spend it in the southeast, you get a big forever liability.
That's right. Yeah, return on investment, and I think you've made a really good point. Reminds me of these inflated land prices where no one's done anything to improve the land or even the house on it, and yet you have ridiculous land price increases where no one's produced a good or a service. People say, "Oh, it's great," maybe. It's not really helping the country at all.
Unless you've got two houses, it doesn't give you anything, because you still need to live in a house. And if you sell it and you've only got one, you've got to go and buy another one. It costs you money to get out to the agent. It costs you money to get in from the taxes. So you're out of pocket somewhere between $20,000 and $30,000 for a standard priced house. About $500,000 or whatever. So that's a loss and just a benefit for real estate agents and the government. This situation of making something and trying to keep people all in those cities just drives up the price of the same thing. Get out in the regions. How much better would it be in Brisbane if we took 1 million people out and spread them across the regions? How much more livable would Brisbane if you took 1 million people out?
It would be better.
Well, we've got plenty of room and plenty of opportunities as long as someone invests in infrastructure. Anyway, that's my...
Bill, would you mind if I put in a plug for our youth training program?
That's fine. And the other thing is too, any links you want put on the comment when we post this up, we'll put any links you want on the comments area, and people click on that.
Yeah, I just thought I'd mention it because we have had delegates from North Queensland do our youth training program. And what we do is we try to find sponsors to help cover the extra travel they've got to do.
Yep.
Sort of, soften the blow. The training program is called Youth Political Advocacy Training, YPAT, ypat.com.au. And what we do is it's an intensive for 1 week, usually in Brisbane or Sydney. You make friends, and we take them right through the foundational principles of a just society. We talk about some of the Christian and Jewish roots of some of those principles and virtues, like loving your neighbour. But it's not a religious program. It's really about politics, how society works, how institutions work, where unions came from, how the economy works, even defence and strategy. Like, how is Australia in the world from a defence point of view? Like, why would you want Australia? So it's pretty interesting, and we've been doing it for 15 years. We've got over 300 alumni.
Yeah.
So I just recommend it if you got young people there who looking for something a bit different, and they want to learn. They've got an open mind. It's every winter.
Yeah. Well, I suppose the thing is, if it's probably a good thing if we could find people like companies up in Cairns and that who would at least sponsor one person a year to go down to it or something like that. Would probably wouldn't be that a harder task if people knew about it.
Yep.
So that's our job. That's our job.
Wonderful. Yeah. It's been a pleasure, Bill. Thank you for the invite.
No, thanks for coming up. Oh, look, thanks for the time. Thanks for your interest in new states. But yeah, what we'll do, we'll give you, we'll upload this program, send you the links sometime tomorrow with a thank you. And if you just could text me the links you want or email me the links you want put on attached to the story when we post it up, we'll do that as well. But Luke, it's been a pleasure. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Bill. Pleasure is mine too. Thank you. All the best.
All right. Good night. Thank you. Bye.
Good night.